The heavy iron gates of the medium-security prison clanged shut behind Chuck Norris as he stepped into the yard. He walked calmly, his eyes scanning the environment with quiet awareness, yet there was no sign of aggression in his demeanor. Today, he was just another inmate, or so everyone thought. Chuck's casual clothes, a plain gray jumpsuit, and worn sneakers made him blend in perfectly. The other prisoners glanced at him briefly, some with curiosity, others with dismissive smirks. A group of rough-looking inmates noticed him almost immediately. They had been scanning the yard for potential targets, someone they could intimidate, maybe someone easy to push around. Chuck's calm stride and serene expression made him appear naive, even harmless. One of the inmates, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, nudged his companion. "Hey, new guy," he sneered. "You lost or something? You don't belong here." His voice carried a mixture of mockery and challenge. Chuck stopped walking, tilted his head slightly, and gave a polite nod. "I'm just here to serve my time and stay out of trouble," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. There was something in his tone, an unshakable confidence, that made the scarred inmate hesitate for just a second. He didn't recognize the calm storm standing before him. The gang, misreading Chuck's composure as weakness, started circling him. One of them stepped closer, trying to intimidate him with a shove. "Don't act like you're better than us. We run this yard," the inmate growled. The others laughed, enjoying the display of perceived dominance. The other prisoners watched from a distance, sensing the tension building in the air. But Chuck didn't react aggressively. He simply took a measured step back, allowing them to make the first move if they chose. Every eye in the yard was on him now. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation. "Who is this guy, and why isn't he scared?" murmured some of the inmates. Little did they know, the man standing in front of them was not an ordinary inmate. Beneath that calm exterior was a living legend, a decorated Delta Force commander whose very presence commanded respect. They had no idea of the storm that quietly simmered within him, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And in that tense silence, one thought echoed through the yard. These men are about to learn the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. The yard seemed to shift subtly as the group of inmates closed in around Chuck Norris. What had started as casual curiosity now carried an edge of danger. The scarred inmate, emboldened by his friends, circled Chuck like a predator, eyes scanning for any hint of weakness. "So, what's your name, newbie?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of mockery and menace. Chuck remained calm, his hands at his sides, his eyes level with the gang leader. "I'm Chuck," he replied evenly. "I'm just here to do my time." The simplicity of his answer, the calmness in his tone, irritated the gang more than anything. They had expected fear, hesitation, maybe a nervous stumble. Instead, they got poise. The scarred man grinned, revealing yellowed teeth, and leaned closer. "Do you think that's going to keep you safe?" he sneered. "Around here, we don't care who you are. You're going to learn that the hard way." Chuck tilted his head slightly, measuring them without a hint of panic. "I don't want trouble," he said softly. "But I won't let anyone disrespect me or others either." That simple statement, spoken without anger but with absolute clarity, made some of the gang hesitate. There was a firmness in his voice, a quiet authority they didn't understand but instinctively recognized. One of the younger inmates, eager to prove himself, stepped forward and shoved Chuck roughly in the shoulder. The movement was aggressive, but not enough to knock him off balance. Chuck didn't react violently. He simply sidestepped with fluid precision, the smallest motion redirecting the force. The kid stumbled slightly, his confidence shaken, and the other gang members exchanged uneasy glances. Now the yard had a new audience. Other prisoners had noticed the confrontation and were watching from benches and corners, smartphones secretly raised, recording. There was curiosity, tension, and fear all mixed in the air. Everyone sensed that something unusual was unfolding. The gang leader, frustrated by the lack of response, raised his voice. "You think you're better than us? You think you can walk around here like you own the place?" Chuck met his gaze without flinching. "I don't think I'm better than anyone," he said, calm yet firm. "But I do believe respect is earned, not demanded." His words cut through the noise of the yard, and for a moment, the tension was palpable. The leader's eyes narrowed. "Respect? In here? Nobody gives respect without fighting for it," he spat. Chuck didn't move a muscle, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he simply shifted slightly to maintain space, showing control and confidence that made the gang uneasy. Other inmates whispered among themselves. "Who is this guy?" murmured one. "Why isn't he scared?" another asked. Phones continued to click quietly, capturing every moment of the unfolding confrontation. The scarred leader, growing impatient, motioned for the younger men to surround Chuck. "All right, enough talking," he said. "Time to show him." Chuck's eyes swept over the group, calm and unafraid. He didn't flinch, didn't back away. Every motion he made was measured, every breath controlled. The tension was a living thing in the yard now, thick enough to cut with a knife. Where are you watching this story from? Which country or city? Drop it in the comments below. Let's see how far Chuck's legendary calm and skill reach. The gang advanced in unison, assuming he would panic under pressure. They underestimated him completely. Chuck's military instincts, honed over years of Delta Force training, kicked in silently. Every subtle movement of his eyes, every stance, every slight shift of weight was calculated. He didn't attack, but he was already a step ahead of them mentally, reading their intentions, predicting their moves. A small crowd of bystanders in the yard began to murmur. Some were secretly rooting for Chuck, sensing the injustice. Others were simply captivated, phones out, waiting for the inevitable clash. Chuck's calm presence contrasted with the chaotic energy of the gang, creating an almost cinematic tension in the air. The scarred leader, noticing the hesitation of his own gang, tried to assert dominance. "You think standing there like a statue is going to help you? We'll see about that," he growled. He took a half step forward, testing Chuck's reaction. Chuck simply met his gaze evenly, unflinching, exuding the quiet authority of someone who had faced far greater threats and emerged unscathed. The gang exchanged nervous glances, uncertainty creeping in. Even though they had intended to bully and intimidate, the calm aura of Chuck Norris made them pause. Something about him wasn't right. The way he moved, the way he held himself, the quiet but unbreakable confidence. The stage was set for the first real confrontation. The air crackled with anticipation. The gang thought they were about to have fun at someone's expense. What they didn't know was that they had just stepped into a storm they couldn't control. Chuck Norris was ready, fully aware of his surroundings, and prepared for whatever came next, all while maintaining the calm exterior of a man who could handle anything. The yard, tense and silent, waited with bated breath. The first move would come soon, and when it did, everyone watching would realize that appearances were incredibly deceiving. The tension in the prison yard had reached its peak. Chuck Norris stood calm, surveying the circle of aggressive inmates surrounding him. The gang, now fully confident that he was just another weak newcomer, exchanged smirks and subtle nods. "All right, boys," the scarred leader hissed. "Time to show him who runs this yard." The youngest inmate, eager to prove himself, lunged first. He rushed at Chuck with a poorly aimed punch, expecting Chuck to stumble or flinch. But Chuck was ready. In a smooth motion that seemed almost casual, he sidestepped, redirecting the young man's momentum and gently, but firmly, sending him sprawling onto the dusty ground. The attack was non-lethal, almost elegant, but the effect was immediate. The yard went silent. The other inmates froze, their eyes widening in disbelief. The audacity of their target's calm reaction was unnerving. Chuck's stance never wavered. His movements were precise, economical, and deliberate, the silent signature of a man trained to neutralize threats without unnecessary force. The gang leader snarled, anger bubbling in his chest. "You think that's enough to scare us?" he barked. "Get him." This time, 3 inmates charged simultaneously from different directions, hoping to overwhelm him with numbers. But Chuck's perception and timing were unmatched. He shifted his weight, pivoted, and intercepted each attacker with a series of swift, calculated maneuvers. One attacker went tumbling over another. Another found himself immobilized with a grip so firm he couldn't escape. Chuck moved like water, controlled, unstoppable, yet completely aware of his surroundings. The crowd of prisoners watching from the sidelines gasped and whispered. Some pulled out their phones, capturing every move. Others leaned in, captivated, a mixture of fear and awe crossing their faces. Chuck's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaotic energy of the gang. The yard had become a stage, and every eye was on him. Could you take on a skilled fighter like Chuck? Type yes or no in the comments. Who else would stay this calm under pressure? The The scarred leader, now desperate to regain control, attempted a direct strike at Chuck's head. But Chuck anticipated the move in an instant. With a subtle shift of his body and a precise parry, he neutralized the attack, sending the leader stumbling back into his own gang. For the first time, doubt flickered across the leader's face. The gang members hesitated, fear beginning to creep in. They had thought this would be an easy display of dominance, a chance to humiliate a newcomer. Instead, they had walked into a masterclass of combat discipline. Chuck's control was unshakable. He didn't raise his voice, didn't yell. His authority was evident in his posture, in the way he moved, in the quiet force of his presence. Even the youngest inmates started to retreat, confusion and fear replacing their earlier bravado. The older, more experienced gang members glanced at one another, realization dawning that this was no ordinary prisoner. The whispers began. Who is this guy? He moves like a Delta Force operative. Chuck, sensing the hesitation, allowed himself a momentary pause. He looked around, scanning for anyone still willing to challenge him. His eyes met the scarred leaders, and without a word, the message was clear. Any further aggression would be met with precise, unavoidable consequences. The leader's pride prevented him from backing down. You'll regret standing there, freak, he muttered under his breath. He gestured for one final coordinated attack, trying to rally the remaining gang members. But by now, the yard had changed. Prisoners weren't just watching anymore. They were anticipating something extraordinary. The calm confidence and skill displayed by Chuck had turned him into the center of attention, a silent force commanding respect. Chuck shifted slightly, preparing for whatever came next. Each muscle in his body was taut, ready, yet controlled. He didn't need to prove anything beyond his silent demonstration of skill and discipline. In that instant, the gang understood, even if subconsciously. This was a man who had faced far greater threats than they could ever imagine. The first strike had been neutralized. The second attempt would be met the same way. And as Chuck stood in the center of the yard, unwavering, the bystanders realized that appearances were dangerously deceptive. If you were in Chuck's shoes, would you fight back like him or try to escape? Comment below what you'd do in this situation. The stage was set for the next chapter. The gang, humbled and shaken, would soon confront the full reality of who they had dared to attack. And Chuck, still calm, still controlled, was ready to reveal just how deadly a calm Delta Force veteran could be. The prison yard was electric with tension. The gang had just experienced the first wave of Chuck Norris's precision and skill, yet they were still stubbornly confident that numbers would prevail. To them, he was an anomaly, a calm, quiet man who had somehow neutralized their initial attacks. But they still underestimated him. The scarred leader straightened, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. He got lucky the first time, he muttered to his crew, though doubt flickered in his eyes. But we've got him now. Let's hit him together, no mercy. The younger inmates, emboldened by the leader's words, repositioned themselves, trying to encircle Chuck fully. Chuck, however, didn't flinch. He subtly adjusted his stance, shifting his weight in a way that was almost imperceptible. His eyes scanned every movement of the gang, anticipating each strike before it even happened. Every muscle in his body was coiled and ready, a controlled storm waiting for the right moment. He wasn't aggressive, but every subtle motion radiated authority and confidence. The gang lunged, trying to overwhelm him with coordinated strikes. But Chuck didn't need brute force. With precise timing, he moved fluidly, intercepting attacks with the minimum effort necessary. A shove here, a pivot there, and one gang member found himself sprawled on the ground, staring up in disbelief. Another, attempting a grab, was redirected harmlessly, yet effectively, into a wall. Each move was calculated, showing skill far beyond what the gang had anticipated. The scarred leader's frustration grew. He's just a man, he shouted. We've faced tougher than him. Yet even as he barked these words, a seed of doubt had taken root in his mind. Chuck's composure, his effortless control of the situation, and his ability to anticipate every move had shaken the gang in a way no brute force could. The surrounding prisoners watched in awe. Phones were out, capturing every second. Whispers spread through the yard. Who is this guy? There's no way he's just some new inmate. Chuck's calm demeanor and unshakable presence had turned him into a magnet for attention. What was supposed to be a quick act of intimidation had transformed into a lesson in discipline and skill. The gang tried again, this time more coordinated, thinking they could use numbers to overwhelm him. Chuck met each attack with silent efficiency. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to make dramatic gestures. Every movement was precise, controlled, and purposeful. Each time the gang lunged, they met a wall of experience and discipline they couldn't penetrate. One inmate, emboldened by the chaos, attempted a reckless kick. Chuck sidestepped effortlessly, using the attacker's own momentum to spin him around and land him on the ground. The yard fell momentarily silent. Even the more confident gang members exchanged uneasy glances. Something wasn't right. This man wasn't just skilled. He was beyond anything they had faced. Chuck remained calm, letting their aggression fizzle as they became increasingly desperate. He didn't gloat, didn't taunt. Instead, he radiated the quiet authority of a man who had faced far worse and come out unscathed. His Delta Force training, honed over years of the most dangerous missions in the world, allowed him to neutralize threats efficiently while staying in complete control. The scarred leader realized his gang was faltering. Fear had begun to creep into their movements. Hesitation replaced aggression. For the first time, they felt the weight of their mistake. Underestimating Chuck Norris was no longer a gamble. It was a trap. Even so, pride kept the leader from backing down. "He's just a man," he barked again, though his voice now carried an edge of uncertainty. "We've got numbers. He can't beat all of us." But his words rang hollow. Chuck's calm gaze and measured stance told a different story. One wrong move, and they would all feel the consequences. The yard was now a theater of tension. Every prisoner was watching, knowing something extraordinary was unfolding. Chuck's skill and composure had turned him into the center of attention, commanding respect even from those who had originally intended to intimidate him. Have you ever been underestimated like this? Comment below if you've ever faced a challenge where people thought you couldn't handle it. The stage was set for the next chapter. The gang, shaken but still defiant, would soon realize that their underestimation of Chuck Norris was not just a mistake. It was the beginning of their ultimate lesson. And Chuck, silent and composed, was ready to demonstrate the full extent of his legendary Delta Force skills. The air was thick with anticipation. Every bystander, every inmate, and even the guards could feel it. The quiet storm at the center of the yard was about to break. And when it did, no one would forget it. The scarred leader's patience had finally snapped. After multiple failed attempts to intimidate Chuck, he signaled his gang to launch a full-scale attack. "Enough talk," he roared. "Take him down, all of you." The inmates surged forward in a coordinated rush, hoping that sheer numbers would finally overpower the man who had already humiliated them multiple times. But Chuck Norris remained perfectly calm, his body taut and ready, his senses alert to every subtle movement around him. He didn't flinch. He didn't shout. He simply shifted slightly, pivoted, and prepared to counter the incoming assault. To the gang, it seemed like he was standing still, almost serene. But within that calm exterior was a storm of precision, experience, and lethal skill honed over decades as a Delta Force commander. The first attacker lunged with a wild swing. Chuck sidestepped with a smooth, fluid motion, using the man's own momentum to send him crashing into a nearby bench. Before the second attacker could react, Chuck spun and delivered a precise, controlled strike that neutralized the assailant without causing serious harm, but with undeniable authority. Every strike, every movement was calculated, efficient, and devastatingly effective. The gang members froze, stunned by the unexpected skill and composure. They had expected a weak man, someone who could be bullied and thrown around. Instead, they faced someone who anticipated their every move, moved with superhuman precision, and neutralized threats effortlessly. Chuck's actions were a demonstration of mastery. His Delta Force training allowed him to control multiple attackers simultaneously, disarm them, and subdue them without chaos. The scarred leader tried to rally his remaining gang members. "Hit him together. Don't let him." But his words faltered as Chuck intercepted two attackers at once, redirecting them into each other with perfect timing. The leader's confidence began to waver. Fear crept into his eyes as he realized that brute force alone would not win this fight. Other inmates, once cheering the gang, now watched in awe. Phones were out, cameras recording the astonishing display of controlled combat. Whispers rippled through the yard. Who is this guy? How can one man move like that? He's not just trained, he's a legend. Chuck didn't shout or taunt. His presence alone was enough to command authority. Every move communicated discipline, power, and the message, respect is earned through skill, focus, and integrity. He neutralized the gang methodically, one by one, without raising his voice. The yard had transformed from a hostile battlefield into a demonstration of flawless technique and discipline. The scarred leader, now desperate, tried a reckless attack. But Chuck anticipated it perfectly. With a combination of blocks, pivots, and controlled strikes, he disarmed the man and sent him sprawling to the ground, utterly defeated. The remaining gang members hesitated, fear replacing aggression. They had underestimated Chuck Norris to their peril. The surrounding prisoners could hardly believe their eyes. The legend of Chuck Norris wasn't just a rumor. They were witnessing firsthand the skill, calm, and authority of a man who had faced the most dangerous missions in the world and survived. Every punch, every maneuver was executed with surgical precision. Every movement radiated control. Chuck's calm gaze swept across the remaining attackers. No one dared move. Even the scarred leader, shaking with humiliation, realized that the fight was over. This was a man who had fought far deadlier battles and emerged victorious. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to intimidate. His skill alone commanded obedience and respect. If you were in this yard, would you stand up to him or back away? Comment below what you'd do. With the gang fully neutralized and the yard silent except for whispers and camera clicks, Chuck remained in the center, unbroken, composed, and utterly in control. He had demonstrated the full extent of his abilities without arrogance or cruelty. His Delta Force training had not only protected him but taught the gang and the bystanders a powerful lesson about respect, discipline, and the danger of underestimating someone. The stage was set for the revelation. Soon, the remaining prisoners would discover who they had actually attacked, and the respect Chuck commanded would extend far beyond the yard. The scarred leader's humiliation was complete, and the prisoners who had once mocked him now saw the calm, unstoppable force they had dared to provoke. And in that tense, electrified silence, one truth was undeniable. Appearances are deceiving, and true skill is always revealed when it is tested under pressure. The prison yard had fallen completely silent. The gang, once full of bravado, now stood frozen in disbelief. Chuck Norris had neutralized every attack with precision, calm, and almost supernatural control. His Delta Force training had allowed him to subdue multiple attackers simultaneously without ever raising his voice, and the effect on the onlookers was electric. Every prisoner, guard, and even the scarred gang leader could feel the presence of someone extraordinary. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, one of the younger inmates, who had been recording the entire confrontation on his phone, noticed a glint on Chuck's jumpsuit, a subtle insignia that indicated military service. He leaned closer to whisper to another inmate, "Guys, I think he's not just a fighter, he's military. Look at that patch." Whispers began spreading quickly through the yard, growing louder with every repetition. "He's Delta Force, the real Delta Force," one muttered. Another added, "Wait, isn't Chuck Norris that legendary guy? The one who's supposed to be unbeatable?" The scarred gang leader froze mid-step, his mind racing. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The man they had been mocking, threatening, and trying to attack was no ordinary inmate. He was a living legend, a Delta Force commander who had faced and survived the deadliest missions in the world. Every move, every counterattack they had witnessed now made perfect sense. Their fear intensified, and a deep sense of shame washed over them. Even some of the surrounding prisoners who had initially stood aside began to murmur in awe. The atmosphere in the yard had shifted completely. Chuck's calm demeanor, once interpreted as naivety, was now understood as the quiet confidence of a true warrior. The gang had overestimated their own strength and underestimated the power of discipline, skill, and experience. Chuck took a measured step forward, scanning the yard, his eyes calm but authoritative. He didn't need to shout or assert dominance. His presence alone was commanding. The gang, fully aware of the mistake they had made, instinctively took a step back. Fear replaced aggression. Pride crumbled into humility. One of the guards, who had been observing from a distance, finally stepped forward. "Gentlemen, "I think you all need to understand the kind of man you just challenged," he said. "That's Chuck Norris, decorated Delta Force commander, veteran of countless missions, and a living legend." The effect was instantaneous. The gang leader's jaw dropped. He looked at Chuck with a mixture of fear, respect, and disbelief. The younger inmates stared wide-eyed, some even taking a knee out of instinctive respect. Chuck's skill alone had humbled them, but now his identity amplified the awe and reverence in the yard. "Did you expect Chuck to be a Delta Force commander? Type legend in the comments if you knew." Chuck's expression remained calm, almost serene. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His actions had already sent the message. Respect isn't demanded by fear. It's earned through discipline, skill, and integrity. He spoke softly but firmly, addressing the now silent yard. "Respect should never depend on who you are," he said. "It should come from how you act, how you treat others, and the discipline you carry within yourself. Violence and arrogance are temporary. True skill, control, and humility last forever." The words sank in. The gang, humbled beyond measure, could only nod in silent agreement. Their former arrogance had been dismantled not by rage, but by calm authority and flawless skill. The other inmates, many of whom had recorded the entire encounter, whispered among themselves, sharing their awe. Phones clicked rapidly, capturing Chuck's demonstration of skill and character. The scarred leader, now completely subdued, spoke quietly, almost to himself. We attacked a legend." The words felt surreal, even shameful. Chuck didn't need to respond. His presence alone conveyed the lesson. Never underestimate anyone based on appearances. By the time the guards began to move in and restore order, the yard had transformed. The gang members who had once sought to dominate now held their heads low, having learned a lesson in humility and respect that they would never forget. Chuck Norris walked slowly, deliberately, across the yard, scanning the faces of the inmates. His calm authority left an impression that would last far longer than any fight ever could. The incident would soon spread beyond the walls of the prison. The footage, now captured on multiple phones, would make its way online, showing the world exactly why Chuck Norris was more than just a fighter. He was a living legend. And even within the prison walls, one truth was undeniable. Appearances can deceive, but skill, experience, and integrity always reveal the real story. Chuck Norris's reputation had preceded him, but it was his actions, his calm under pressure, and his discipline that had truly made the moment unforgettable. The gang had learned the hard way that mocking or attacking someone without knowing their full story could have consequences far beyond their imagination. And as the yard settled, whispers of awe and respect continued to ripple through the prisoners, guards, and everyone who had witnessed the demonstration. Chuck Norris, the silent force of discipline and mastery, had left an indelible mark, not through arrogance, but through calm authority, skill, and the revelation of his true identity. The prison yard had finally returned to a tense calm, but the atmosphere was far from ordinary. Chuck Norris walked slowly across the concrete, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The gang members who had once surrounded him now stood at a respectful distance, their faces marked with a mixture of fear, awe, and humility. Even the scarred leader, once so arrogant, lowered his gaze, silently acknowledging the lesson he had learned the hard way. Every prisoner in the yard had witnessed something extraordinary. Phones were out, recording every movement, every precise strike, and every calm, authoritative glance from Chuck. The footage captured more than just a fight. It captured a lesson in discipline, skill, and respect. Chuck's display wasn't about defeating his attackers. It was about showing the power of control, composure, and unwavering self-respect. The guards, who had been observing from the perimeter, finally stepped in to restore formal order. But even they were impressed. One of the senior officers approached Chuck with a subtle nod, an unspoken acknowledgement of the man's extraordinary abilities. Chuck nodded back, silently expressing that the lesson had already been delivered. No words were necessary. His actions spoke volumes. The gang leader, humbled beyond belief, spoke quietly to his remaining crew. We messed up. That was no ordinary man. We challenged a legend." His voice trembled, a mixture of shame and newfound respect. The other gang members murmured in agreement. Their arrogance, once their shield, had been dismantled, replaced with understanding and respect, not fear of brutality, but awe of mastery. Meanwhile, the recorded videos began circulating almost immediately. Within hours, clips of Chuck's calm but precise handling of the gang went viral on social media. Hashtags like hashtag Chuck Norris legend, hashtag Delta Force Master, and hashtag respect over fear started trending worldwide. Viewers everywhere were captivated by the story of a man who didn't need to shout, didn't need to display rage, yet completely dominated a dangerous situation with skill and composure. Comment sections flooded with admiration. People typed messages like, "That's the definition of a true legend. Discipline and skill over aggression every time. And if only everyone treated others with that kind of respect." Chuck's actions resonated far beyond the prison walls. The lesson he embodied, that respect is earned through mastery, discipline, and humility, spread like wildfire. Even within the prison, the change was palpable. The gang members, once feared, now carried a new understanding. They spoke less recklessly, treated others with more caution, and recognized the importance of discipline. Chuck's presence had left an indelible mark not just on them, but on the broader prison community. Chuck, as always, remained humble. He did not gloat or demand recognition. He walked with quiet dignity, understanding that the impact of his actions was far greater than the fight itself. His calm authority, strategic skill, and moral clarity had taught an unforgettable lesson about human behavior, courage, and respect. If you believe everyone deserves respect, type respect in the comments. Share this story and remember, true strength comes from discipline, humility, and courage. As the day ended and the prison settled into routine, one truth lingered in everyone's mind. Appearances can be deceiving, arrogance is temporary, and true skill and integrity leave a lasting impact. Chuck Norris had proven that being calm, disciplined, and respectful could be more powerful than rage, fear, or brute force. The videos continued to circulate worldwide. Millions watched, shared, and commented. News outlets picked up the story, praising Chuck's restraint, precision, and wisdom. The gang faced formal disciplinary actions, but more importantly, they had internalized the lesson that arrogance and violence without respect are dangerous and futile. And while Chuck walked away quietly, leaving the yard behind, his legacy, not just as a fighter or a Delta Force commander, but as a teacher of discipline, respect, and quiet authority, had reached far beyond the walls of the prison. The story of that day became a global symbol of restraint, skill, and moral authority. Chuck Norris had not only defended himself, he had shown the world that true power lies in calmness, courage, and the wisdom to act with integrity. The lesson was simple, unforgettable, and universal. Never judge someone by appearances, underestimate their skill, or dismiss the quiet strength of discipline and respect.